Did you always know that you were interested in pursuing a career in history, and what motivated your passion for history?
No, I never knew I was interested in a career in history, preservation, any of that. I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. So my first 3 careers were in teaching. I taught language arts. We used to call it English. But my interest was always in imparting knowledge and helping people learn and opening new doors. So the thing about history and historic preservation is you can come at it from any direction. As a teacher, I've always said you can teach anything through history. You can teach science, you can teach language arts, you can teach math, you can teach whatever you want to teach, art, through history, because history is storytelling. So you can come at it from any different direction. So I work with people. My degree is in English education with a minor in French. Don't ask me anything in French because I can't do it anymore. But I work with people who are lawyers, who are architects, who are actual historians. They went to school to be historians. I work with people who are transportation specialists, who are other educators, because history and historic preservation requires a plethora of knowledge. It requires you to work in all sorts of industries. That whatever you are interested in, go study that, because that will be applicable to whatever you do in historic preservation. That building over there at some point probably had, that church over there probably had some sort of historical renovation that had to be done, and that requires an architect, and that requires an engineer, and that requires an artisan if they have to do new stained glass. Any kind of archaeological discovery requires an archaeologist. It also requires an accountant, a lawyer, sometimes a civil engineer. So there really isn't anything you can study that's wrong or that's not the right thing if you want to go into preservation, because it uses every set of knowledge that you could want.
So kind of, I guess this is like a little bit of a personal question, like looking back, like trying to discover more about my family's history. Like a lot of African American groups, so much of that history, like it's really hard to figure out like birth dates and records and stuff from like earlier generations, because a lot of them couldn't read or didn't know those actual dates themselves. So do you have any, I guess, tips or like advice, or how do you go about the preservation of not just family history, but just like history from earlier generations when that history could have been stolen from them, or they may not have had access to it themselves?
There are a lot of HBUs, historically black universities, that have libraries, and they have people on staff who specialize in genealogy. So you could start with them. There are also community groups on the ground, like THC, Texas Historical Commission, works with a group outside of Houston that is restoring a lot of freedmen's colonies. And they are associated with, I'm not going to remember the university down there, in keeping those records and finding those records, making sure those records get preserved. So I would look for any community historical association. You could start there. Check with historically black universities around wherever your family might be from. There are lots of community nonprofit organizations on the ground that are also interested in preserving community history. So if you start where you are, and then start with maybe where your family has been, and look for those organizations that are already on the ground, that have already done that kind of work, that's usually a good place to start.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge today. I am a co-author of Filipinos and Laos.
Nice.
One of our struggles is really finding Filipinos that have been here prior to the 70s We know a lot of the trailblazers, but a lot of it has been through migration waves. I guess, what are your tips on, where should we start? How should we approach our research in trying to uncover and find, earlier settlements of Filipinos in Dallas, or any demographic?
Yeah, that's the hardest part often is finding the sources. Where are the sources that tell your stories? Because especially for undertold stories, which ethnic minorities are usually undertold stories, unfortunately, a lot of that just doesn't exist. So a lot of what I would suggest to you is the same thing that I've suggested. Start with universities, start with academic institutions that are dedicated to the same thing you are, to finding those resources and uncovering those resources. I'm not as familiar with Filipino history in Texas, but that's certainly an area that needs to be uncovered. So any kind of Asian organization, I think, would be very helpful. But there really are people at universities who feel the same as you do and who want to make sure that those undertold stories are represented and preserved. So even if you just cold call somebody and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, you could call the education department. You could call, if they have a language department, call them. Certainly call the history department. Just say, is there anybody that you could send me to? Because 9 times out of 10, those people have a huge network that I don't, and that other sort of historical agencies may not have either. And chances are that they have made inroads with community organizations because they're looking for the same things you are. So, start at the top, and, they get calls like this all the time. I'm trying to think of, there is in Austin a Pan-American museum. That's another place to look, also for you. Museums that tell specific stories have a curator, and those people will have contacts. So start there too. But it does take a lot of research on your own, because unfortunately those stories haven't been preserved as well as they should have. But start with the big guys, because they've already done this, and they've already built networks, and they are really interested in the same thing you are, making sure that those stories get remembered and told. Yeah.
I have a quick question, if that's okay too. Okay. Regarding preserving specifically your family history, I feel like in my experience, like my parents are from Pakistan and they came here, right? And I feel like they're not very open to talking about their past, right? Even if you kind of probe them. And then if I talk to my grandparents, there seems to be a little bit of a language barrier as well. So like, I guess I don't want like our history to be watered down. Like when I have kids hopefully in the future, like how do you I guess advice on like getting your family's history with those barriers and also just like passing it on?
So one of the things we talk to kids about when doing oral history is knowing what information is it that you're wanting from that person. So like if you sit down and you say, Grandma, tell me about your life, it's going to be, I don't know, what do you want me to tell you? So part of it is preparing for the interview. So one of the conversations you might have if y'all, have dinner together or just in your out, hey, I am really interested in knowing where our family's from and, what were your experiences like? Just sort of seed the ground. Don't do it then, but just let her know, I'm really interested in talking to you about this. Then she'll start thinking, oh, well, that might be fun, and what kind of stories might I tell? Then you sit down and make a list of questions that you would want to ask her. What content is it that you want to get out of her that only she has? Because she's a story holder. There is no other story holder like her. So you need to figure out what stories do you want to get from her and what information do you want. And then one of the things that you can do is you can just give her all those questions. Just put it on a piece of paper, say, here's everything I'd like to know from you, pick 5. And so you start small. Because what happens is there's a lot of fear of having a camera and a microphone stuck in your face, even if it's from your family. So you need to kind of prepare the ground for that. and tell her that you want to know this because you want your kids to know this, and you want to know this, and you want those stories to continue even after she's gone. Start slowly, because usually once they start talking, they figure out, I actually kind of enjoy this. And there are things that she will discover she wants to impart to you. So tell her that you'd like to do this. You think about what information you want to get. You write up a set of questions, give it to her, and say, let's start with a few of these. Which are you most comfortable starting with? And make them kind of small questions, like, give me one example of what growing up in Pakistan was like that's different from what I might have experienced growing up here. Bite-sized kind of questions, not tell me about your life. And then as you go, those other questions will come up naturally, and she will get used to having, whatever apparatus you're going to be using. So it's really just kind of, coming in the back door, but letting her know that that's what you want to do.
Thank you. I'll do that next time I see her.
Yeah. You'll be surprised. I mean, a lot of people they can't do what I'm doing. They can't just get up and talk, but I'm a teacher. I can talk forever. But most people aren't comfortable doing that, and especially with apparatus, and especially if it's about them. So if you sort of make it about you, I want to know your stories, because you're the only one who has those stories. And here's the way I'm going to help us. Here are 5 questions. Which ones do you want to talk with? That kind of gives them a box to operate in, and it's not just this free-for-all, Grandma, sit down and let's talk for 2 hours.
Quick, okay, go first.
Yeah.
You go first. Sure. Okay. So you mentioned that you were a teacher, and so I feel like we kind of might be the outliers of people who are super involved and into history. So what do you think is one of the best ways to, get people involved into history, even for us to get our peers more involved in history? Because like we've been talking about, it's so important to know your family history, national history, local history. So what do you think are some of the best ways to kind of go about that?
Well, I think making it personal in that you are the only people who can tell your history right now. And if you don't tell your history, it may not get told. And it may not get told the way you want it to be told. And it may not be told with your truth. So if you couch it in who do you want to be telling history? Who are going to be the holders of history? Because it's either going to be you, or it's going to be some arbitrary group of people who are going to say this is history because we say this is history. So if you pitch it to them as this is your chance now to get on the record what this history is for you right now before somebody else tells it, and tells it in a way through their lens, that can be pretty powerful if people feel like, well, wait, who's going to tell my story correctly, because that ain't my story. That's one way to do it. Things like this, providing people opportunity to bring their stories to you and tell you what that is, and make sure that they know that your goal is to preserve those stories. It's about making sure that the teller of the story tells the story. I think that especially today, in this zeitgeist, it has a real urgency about, whose words tell history. I won't get on my soapbox, but,
I have a question that kind of goes off of Al's question in a way, in that, I guess we are kind of outliers in that we're interested in history and we're passionate about history, and so I'm curious as to whether, what are opportunities within the state of Texas, through the Texas Historical Commission, through other organizations or affiliates that you may be aware of, for students to explore and to engage their love for history and to kind of expand their passion for the subject? Are there any programs that you might want to recommend students, or any specific opportunities that might be cool?
Yes. I will give an advertisement for my agency. The Texas Historical Commission offers through our foundation, which is the arm of our agency that does most of our civic engagement. A program called Preservation Scholars, and it's open to college kids. It's a 6 weeks program, and you can do it in person or virtually, where you work with a history professional. We have 6 preservation scholars a year. Is that right? Or maybe a semester. It's an application program. You have to put in an application. You can find that on our website. And then you work with one history professional. Like I've had scholars who come because they know they're going to go into the classroom and they want to do something with history in the classroom. So they come to me and we work out some kind of project that they're interested in doing. Sometimes it's a lot of research. Sometimes it's creating a project, a product. Sometimes it's working with other people in divisions to broaden their knowledge of history. So you'll be assigned to a person, but then you can work with a bunch of other people within the agency. You can go work with our archaeologist. You can go work with our maritime archaeologist or whoever you want to. So I would encourage you to apply to that program, THC Preservation Scholars. There are a lot of community programs, community heritage development programs that offer small grants. Those are usually local to your area. And every area has a community heritage person. If you don't know who yours is, you can email me and I'll find out who it is for Dallas. And you can contact them and say, what student opportunities do you have available? As far as other Texas agencies, GLO doesn't have one, and I wouldn't want you to go there anyway. No, they're fine. But definitely check out ours. Check out your community heritage people. Also check out universities because they sometimes have volunteer programs. We have a summer volunteer program where you can go and work with our archaeologists on a dig if you want to. So, come to us first. But then, check your community because there are lots of smaller grant programs that have opportunities as well.
Question. I'm just curious your opinion on online resources like ancestry.com. Would you recommend looking into them? Sometimes people are especially when it comes to non-marginalized communities, they're not as accurate. So I'm just curious if you recommend those.
Honestly, I have never used any of those. I think they are massive clearinghouses for information. So if you want to start there, you probably could. But for the kinds of information that you want, the granular information you need on specific communities, I don't think they have that. So it might be a good place to just start generally to see what's out there. You may find another source through there that's more helpful to you. But I don't think you should stay away from them. But I don't think it's going to dive deep enough into what you need. Yeah.
So one of our things for the book that we're doing for the document Openness of Dallas is we're going to start having call out to actions. So I was wondering, when it comes to gathering the public to share their stories, what has been effective approaches?
Partnership. Partner with somebody else who has a wider PR reach than you do. So that could be a museum, that could be a CHD, Community Heritage Development Group, that could be another university. Social media is like an unpaid PR arm. Use that. Build a Facebook group and all those other things that y'all use that I don't know anything about, but start there. But it's important for you to harness as many additional resources as you can rather than you try and do it yourself. So try to start building some partnerships. You can reach out to corporations and say, hey, Is there a Filipino organization that is, that's a business and say, I'm trying to gather some community involvement. Could you sponsor us? Could you give us a donation? Could you advertise for us? So leverage as much community power as you can to get the message wider. And that also gets your audience wider, because those people's audiences, will become your audience as well. Yeah, so just, go after everybody you can find.
I have one question, just in terms of advice that you would give to students who are passionate about history. Like, what advice would you give to everyone sitting here today on how to approach this field and how to approach this kind of sphere, and how to find confidence and comfort in the discomfort that naturally comes with pursuing a career in historical history?
Yeah, that's a good word, discomfort. And I think that aspect of history is going to really ratchet up here real quick. It already has, and it always has. History and telling history legitimately and historically accurately is always uncomfortable. And it needs to be, because that's history. Somebody else's version is somebody else's version, but there is a factual account of history that needs to be told and needs to be adhered to. So if you're passionate about history, stay passionate about history, because we need those voices out there saying, I'm going to tell this story accurately, and here's the story, here's the story. So stay passionate, stay aware of the zeitgeist, the world around you, not just your passion maybe, but the rest of the passion. Stay involved in the world, and stay politically aware, civically aware, culturally aware, all the awarenesses that you can. Leverage partnerships, like you all know me now. So if there's ever a time that you say, hey, can you help me do this? Well, yes. So find people, find your tribe, that you are comfortable with, that are dedicated to the same things you are, because there's more power in partnership than on your own. And it's just, I think people in history are hypersensitive people, because it takes that to be aware of something outside yourself. And sometimes that is really painful. When you see atrocities, when you see stories that have been, completely twisted, when you see histories that are just erased or never told, that hurts. So I think it takes a special kind of person to want to be in the story, in the story itself. So that would be my advice. Stay aware, stay involved, cultivate partnerships, because it's stronger than doing it on your own. And, leverage whoever you know. Participate in programs like THCs or other community heritage groups that have programs that can help you do this and that can help you get a wider view, because it is what you know, but it's also who you know, because that will help you down the road. And if at any point you have any other questions, it's hard to say, question, ask me a question. I can't do that. So if when I walk away next week you think, I have 10 questions I should have asked her, take a card, email me. I'm always available for chats, or if you want to, Zoom or whatever, I can kind of manage that. I'm happy to do that too. But do be aware of the people who are out here doing the work already, because you need to get to know those people, and you need to say, I am the next generation of what you're doing, and I need to know what to do. Because there is a lot of training, there's a lot of know-how, there's a lot of knocks that we have taken already that we can maybe help you avoid. There's a lot of history is also politics, so there's a lot of navigating you have to know how to do. You know, and we can help you do that, and we can help you learn how to do that, because you're going to have to pass it on to somebody else. So, you know, feel free to see me as a resource. I have other resources that I can introduce you to. So just, you know, start building the blocks, you know, stay aware, stay involved. This is fabulous. You know, I'm thrilled to see all of you here. And, you know, just know that you are involved in important work. This is important work. And know that it's valuable, not just to your particular community, but to the history of your community, the United States, the world, all the future generations.